My lips are plain and my words may not just be my own shallow words, that we may all be inspired by your Holy Spirit. Now that's an especially cheesy picture there. We have Jesus as Iron Man. Jesus as Superman, if you like. I don't know what he's being propelled by, but he has jets coming from under his robe. So that's one consideration of the Ascension. That's a very literal consideration of the Ascension. But one thing that we've learned is that our ancestors in the faith weren't really big on the literal faith. Unless something actually meant something that was going to change your life and your faith, there's no point in telling it. You know, it's not just a historical curiosity. Nothing ever is. It's not, well, that's an interesting story. Fancy them doing that then. You know, it's got to be something a little more profound. So, that old trick happened to me whereby you have to write an e-blast during the week. And you write an e-blast and you realise you've written the sermon. Bother! Bother! All your good ideas and all your inspiration has come out and there it's gone to everyone via email. So we're going to look at the e-blast this week. Alright, let's look at the text, what the Gospel is actually saying, and look at some issues about what the Ascension means. And if it doesn't mean anything, there's no point in it being there. And there's nothing that I can think of that's in the Gospels that doesn't have a meaning. You know, it's not there for our factual titillation. There you go. It's not there to sap our curiosity. And it's never there as a magic trick. There's always a deep meaning. So, excuse me. Well, Luke is really very subdued about this whole business, you know. You would think that something like the Ascension, as it's literally portrayed, would provoke more than half a sentence from Luke in the whole Gospel. But what we have is half a sentence in Luke's Gospel. And it's just a description, a very brief description. And let's remind ourselves what it says, or rather, let's remind me what it says. Whilst he was blessing them, he withdrew from them and was carried up into heaven. That's that. Therefore, we've got to look up why Luke wrote it like that. Because he would think that if the Ascension had been a historical curiosity, a miraculous surprise, then he would have expected page upon page of conjecture and anecdotes and dwelling upon it. This marvellous, extraordinary thing, and he just went whoosh! And then the next thing we knew, it wasn't there. You know, he ascended into the clouds, surrounded by jets of whatever. But instead you have half a sentence. Half a sentence. As it is, Luke mentions hardly anything, because the Ascension is the logical conclusion of a story that he'd already been telling for 24 chapters. It's not a new thing happening. It's not something surprising and miraculous that, wham, gets the readers. It's the logical and appropriate conclusion of the entire narrative of Jesus' ministry, life, death, resurrection. So to an ancient mindset, and by an ancient mindset I mean the time of Christ and beforehand, there's only one alternative to death. And in the Hebrew tradition, that alternative is the assumption of a human being into the substance of God. That they're literally gathered up, physically, spiritually, emotionally, mentally, into the substance of God. And there's some precedents for it in the Hebrew tradition. Elijah never died. Elijah was gathered up, body and soul, into the substance of God. And this, the mysterious figure from the Hebrew tradition, Enoch, also never died, but was gathered directly. So to that ancient mindset where death is associated with the dissolution of the soul, remember in the Hebrew tradition, death wasn't an entrance into everlasting life, death was the end. You lived on and you were blessed by God, by your following generations, by your kids and grandkids, which is why we see people being cursed to the umpteenth generation in the Old Testament. It's because that mindset had it that there was no after. But for Elijah, the symbolism of Elijah being assumed into heaven suggests that he dwelt in eternity. And therefore Jesus, if you remember at the Transfiguration, when they're all on the mountain, the disciples think that Elijah is with Jesus. And that link between Jesus and Elijah is made strongly. So Elijah the prophet and the mysterious Enoch were both assumed into heaven. They moved directly to the throne of God without passing go. That was funny. Wait a minute, let me do it for you. Thank you, wonderful. Heavens and sky are metaphors for the indescribable presence of the divine. Up seems a natural place for the ancients to place God, simply because up was the place where you saw glory. You saw the sun rise and the sun set. You felt warmth. All the things that give you life came from the sky. Down was the obvious place for death and dissolution in the underworld, because anybody who's gone any distance into the bowels of the earth, who knows it gives you the collywobbles. It's not a particularly good collywobble, that doesn't translate, does it? The heebie-jeebies, the screaming hapdaps, the butterflies in the tummy, it's not nice.
There you go.
It's not nice. It's full of bugs and bats, and it's damp and it's dark. And it's obviously the place of death and dissolution, isn't it? Of course, we know that, the place is teeming with life. It's just not the sort of life that you'd necessarily want to keep as a pet. But either way, up was the obvious place to sight the divine. If you go far enough, of course, we now know that everywhere is up. If you go straight through the earth, you're up again, I mean, there is no up and down when you're on a globe. But, to Luke and to Luke's audience, and I say audiences, because we don't know precisely who he was writing for. We know who he says he was writing for, but that's neither here nor there. The preparation had already been made. The story had been prepared. Jesus could only pass out of our physical presence in one way. He had already shown death to be a transitional thing, a transitional relief, a passing gift, and I do mean a gift, because we have a very strange idea towards death in our culture, and I don't see that it's possible to entirely treasure a human life unless you treasure its end as well. It's all part of the same gift. It's not a cruel termination, and it's not a theft, and it's not a punishment. It's how it resolves. How it reconciles, how it is completed. Therefore, to them, he had already shown that death was not an option. So the substance of the divine had to return to the substance of the divine, and it had to return to the substance of the divine unfiltered by the grave. So to the early Christians who knew Jesus to be very God and very human, that very God and very human had to return to the Godhead. And Jesus had already conquered the grave. And therefore the assumption back into the realm of the divine, which we sometimes translate as heaven, but actually the Greek word isn't that subtle, it's just sky, is the obvious way for Jesus to return. So to Luke then, the ascension was obvious, it was given, it was going to happen. That was in the cards as soon as the story of Jesus' remarkable ministry started to unfold. As soon as it became clear that Jesus was something more than just a prophet, that Jesus was divine and human, then the assumption was the only conclusion. That the substance, the ousia, it's a wonderful word, the ousia of the divine, which was in Jesus, and which, incidentally, we are told is in us, is gathered back into the ousia of the divine in the Godhead, in the conversation and the life of the Trinity. Now this is where it gets difficult, this is where it gets troublesome, because we are so often brought up to believe ourselves to be, poorly functioning robots almost, that have been spawned by God. We go all over the place and make a complete pig's ear of it, and then we have to go crawling back in the hope that God will somehow put us back together again. But Jesus, the example and story of Jesus, tell us something radically different. Something that is more challenging to us than our brokenness is. And that is that we follow Jesus into that assumption, into the substance of God. That our separateness is an illusion whilst we are on earth. But it doesn't actually exist. And that upon our death, that separateness is completely done with. And we are properly united with our Creator. So, that's difficult. Some people will find it easier, some people will find it difficult. I would hope you find it difficult in parts, because it means we have to reassess the way we view ourselves as human beings and as Christians, reassess the way we interact with the concept of God. It can never be said too much that you need to dismiss the concept of the slightly bad-tempered old geezer on a throne, who you have to go and placate. We are past the stage where we have to throw virgins into the volcano. But a lot of our Christian religion is just throwing virgins into a volcano by a different name, if we look at it as it's taught now. It's just placating the volcano god. Jesus radically departs from that concept. Radically. So, I'm going to come to a close, because my one hope and wish that in ministry I could remind myself and other people of is something that we probably know in our heart of hearts, but the thing about Christianity is it is a faith of continual return, that you wander off mentally in psychology, that we're easily distracted. That doesn't mean we're broken toys. What it means is we're easily distracted, But what we need to bind into ourselves, and not just on a Sunday, is this concept that we are gods, as the early church fathers used to say. We are gods. Meaning that the divine, and that which we worship as divine, is not something that occurs external to ourselves in a place or time. It is something that occurs within us and around us, which we participate in, and which we grow through contemplation of. We become more than we become complete. Amen. Amen.